For my hearty greetings to Patrick Henry College today. You've joined us for our ongoing Newsmaker interview series with Dr. Marvin Olasky. It is a pleasure to have Marvin Olasky on our faculty. As many of you may know, he is the editor-in-chief of World Magazine and also now holder of Patrick Henry College's Distinguished Chair in Journalism and Public Policy. We're also delighted to have with us today in the audience Mrs. Susan Olasky, who is a writer-in-residence at Patrick Henry College. Welcome, Susan. And welcome to all of you, also to all of you who are joining us via live webcast. You may know Dr. Olasky for many of his public accomplishments, too. George W. Bush, former president, has identified Dr. Olasky as compassionate conservatism's leading thinker. He's also the author of more than 20 books and hundreds of published articles on public policy issues, the analysis of culture, history, pro-life issues, poverty, and public policy concerns of all sorts. So it's a pleasure to have you on our faculty, and thank you for bringing us so many interesting guests, and now especially interesting guest, Representative Frank Wolf. You may know that Mr. Wolf is serving his 16th term in Congress, representing the 10th District of Virginia, which stretches from McLean to Winchester. He sits on the House Appropriations Committee, as well as several subcommittees, and served from 1995 to 2000 as chairman of the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee. Representative Wolf also has been a leading crusader for human rights for a long time, both in the international sphere and in the United States, believing, as he does, that those in Congress have an obligation to speak on behalf of the persecuted. He has traveled to Ethiopia, Sudan, Sierra Leone, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Rwanda, and other countries in Africa to see firsthand the tremendous accounts of the suffering of people at the hands of corrupt governments. He's also addressed AIDS crisis and famine issues. Representative Wolf led the first congressional delegation to Darfur in Western Sudan to bring attention to the crisis there, and he later officially declared, which was later officially declared by the U.S. government as genocide. He also has worked to call attention to human rights abuses and religious persecution in China, Tibet, Romania, Nagorno-Karabakh, Chechnya, Bosnia, Kosovo, East Timor, and the Middle East. You really get around. There's so much more that Representative Wolf has done and continues to do on behalf of righteousness, justice, and equality throughout the world, and we are incredibly honored to welcome this true life hero to Patrick Henry College today, Mr. Frank Wolf.
Thank you. So when you first entered Congress, you were considered an expert on transportation and you worked in that area. When did you start focusing more on religious liberty and human rights issues?
Well, before I answer that, I'd like to recognize my daughter, Virginia, who is in the back, and two of my grandkids, Caleb and Hannah, who are both homeschooled, who live out in Round Hill. I'm glad to see them.
Congratulations.
They have four, but two of them are here. I first got elected on transportation issues, and in 1984, Congressman Tony Hall, who is one of my best friends in Congress, who's in a Bible study with me, a Democrat, urged me to go to Ethiopia. And I went to Ethiopia, got waylaid in a refugee camp operated by World Vision next to a camp run by Mother Teresa, and had to spend several days there because the airplane couldn't come back to pick us up. And that was a life-changing trip, seeing what I saw and the experiences that I saw. The next one, the bookends are 1985. Congressman Hall and Congressman Chris Smith and myself went to Romania. And Romania was darker, Bucharest was darker than Moscow in those days, darker in evil and darker in kilowatt even. And many times people would come up to us and put little notes in our hands telling us my husband's in jail, my daughter's in prison, my son's in prison, and we were at the Second Baptist Church in Aradia with a fellow named Paul Negrut, who I think Mike Ferris's daughter interned for, and one of my daughters later worked over there. Those two trips, human rights, religious freedom, hunger, famine, together helped change a lot of the interests in what I do in Congress. We still work on transportation. This region is transportation is very important. We're trying to bring rail to Dulles, things like that. But human rights and religious freedom became a highlight, if you important, as a result of those two trips to Congressman Hall, a Democrat from Dayton, Ohio, really got me interested in.
And then in your new book, Prisoner of Conscience, you talk about in the Soviet Union walking into a labor camp and shouting, I'm a U.S. Congressman, I want to talk to you. Tell us about that.
I was with Congressman Chris Smith from New Jersey. We were in Perm Camp 35, the camp where Sharansky had been in. And we finally got in. It took us a week to get in. We were with the KGB. And we brought Bibles with us, and long story, we stayed through the night. But seeing that and experiencing that, and interesting enough, which I cover in the book, 3 of the people that we met with in the camp that we stayed through the night, most of the night talking to them, said they worked for us, and they had been actually spies working for our government who had been in prison into Perm Camp 35. So that was another life-changing trip. That my faith and being involved in some of these issues, I've always admired Chuck Colson. I've always been a great fan of Colson. Colson combines the faith aspect and the hard-nosed political aspect. As you know, he had a very high position in the Nixon administration, but yet when he left, did something very important, working for Prison Fellowship. So that trip was kind of another life-changing trip.
So what's been your own combination of the faith aspect and the political aspect?
Well, like I said, I've always admired Chuck. I've read all of his writings. I've read a number of your writings. I've listened to a number of people speak. We have a little Bible study, Republican and Democrat, Congressman Tony Hall, who is no longer in Congress, but still comes. And my faith journey, I think, helped get me interested in these issues. And of course, many of the places that we went to, we meet with believers. I was in China a couple of years ago, and the people that we met with were all basically from the house church, and so the journeys sort of continued on, but it really began with the Bible study, with Congressman Hall, with a trip to Ethiopia, and with a trip to Romania.
In Romania, did you meet with the dictator Ceausescu?
No, we did not. We asked who he would not meet with us. He did not like Congressman Hall, Congressman Smith, nor did he like me. And when we came back, I introduced a bill with Congressman Hall and Congressman Smith to take away the most favored nation trading status with Romania. And we passed it in the House, had a hard time in the Senate, and later it was being blocked by different people and different business interests. And one of the things I referenced in the book, I went down with Jesse Helms and Bill Armstrong to meet with President Reagan. And I give him a copy of a book called The Red Horizon by Pacepa. Do you know Pacepa was the head of the Securitate, if you will, the secret police. And Reagan, that night in Reagan's diary, say that Wolf and some others were down to see me about MFN, and maybe I can take it away. And the next day, he talks about how he met with George Shultz, and he took away most favored nations trading status that Romania had, which in essence went against the State Department and went against the Commerce Department. And so we never did meet Ceausescu, but shortly after the revolution took place, I went to Romania during the revolution, and shortly thereafter, we had a Bible study with some Romanian pastors in Elena Ceausescu's office.
Okay. Let me just, maybe we need to back up for a moment, because I'm wondering, as I look out on the audience here with students, this is a long time ago, and most of you were born after the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and that particular aspect ended. So 2 questions. First, what was that era like generally as we're coming to the end of the Cold War? The repression is still very high. Could you just explain to the students really what was going on at the time? What were some of the tensions? What were some of the particularly evil things that were being done under communism?
Well, there were many evil things being done under communism, and we had a great president then. We had President Reagan, President Ronald Reagan, who I think helped define, if you will. Reagan was criticized for putting cruise missiles in. Reagan put cruise missiles in Europe in 1983. Also, Reagan was the one who said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. It was us versus them, if you could understand it. Once you got to the Berlin Wall, Eastern Europe was behind the Iron Curtain, if you will, but it was it was a different time, and I think we had different leadership in the White House. The country was more together insofar as against communism, but communism, if you recall, was spreading rapidly. President Reagan did everything he could to defeat communism. In fact, as in 1986, I invited out to my house the former Polish ambassador, Professor Spazowski, who was the founder of the Communist Party in Poland. And I remember I wanted my kids to hear from him. He had defected, walked out of the Polish embassy, walked into the White House. And Ambassador Spazowski, in 1986, coming to my house, told me that communism was running rampant, spreading around the world, and that we in the West didn't quite understand, and that communism may very well prevail. And if you read Whittaker Chambers' book, and if you haven't read it, I urge you to read it, called Witness. It's one of the greatest books I've ever read. Whittaker Chambers says in the book, he says, when I left the Communist Party, I believed that I was leaving the winning side, meaning he thought communism was going to win, and joining the losing side. And then he says, nothing I have seen since, after I left communism, has led me to believe that I'm wrong. Whittaker Chambers was wrong because he was wrong because of men like President Reagan and the whole effort with regard to the defeat of communism. And so I think it was a different time, but we had a great leader, I think, I think President Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and Pope John Paul probably did more to bring about the defeat of communism than any three individuals.
Let me just mention two things. First of all, if you go to the library and you see a copy of Witness, it's about 900 pages long, and you might say, gee, I don't have time for that. Read the first 100 pages. Anyway, it's a letter to my children, and it's just in the beginning of it, just read that. You know, the problem is, of course, you read those first 100 pages, you'll want to read the next 800 and ignore your classwork at the time. But anyway, but do that. It is wonderful. Let me ask about China now, because at the time the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Empire dissolved, and the countries in Eastern Europe did become free to a great extent, some more than others. There was hope that the same thing would happen in China, and then there was the murder at the multiple mass murder at Tiananmen Square, as thousands probably of students and others were killed. And what's happened in China since then? What, from your visit a couple of years ago, tell us.
Well, interesting enough, if you go to Tiananmen, most Chinese students do know nothing about Tiananmen. Westerners know much more about Tiananmen than Chinese students. China has gone in there's some good news, but overall mostly bad news. China currently has about 25 Catholic bishops that are under house arrest in China. They have hundreds of Protestant pastors under house arrest and in prison. I was in China several years ago, and we were meeting with some religious leaders, underground house church people, and everyone who was invited to the dinner but one was arrested, and the one who made it was beaten up after. A large number of the dissidents who come to the country come to my office at the prayer breakfast just 2 months ago. A large number of Chinese lawyers, who I think later came out to Patrick Henry. I think they told me they were coming out to Patrick Henry, who many have been harassed because of their faith. China has plundered Tibet. In Tibet today, there are cameras all over, and any movement that's suspicious, the Chinese secret police come in. It's against the law to have a picture of the Dalai Lama in Tibet. Lhasa, which is the capital of Tibet, is really nothing more. It's no longer a Tibetan city. They bulldozed large portions of the city. China is spying against this. China has the most aggressive cyber spying against this. They're much more sophisticated than the Soviet Union, much more active than the Soviet Union, much more aggressive than the KGB. And yet we're borrowing from them. We're borrowing money from a nation. It's like our banker. It'd be like if you had a small business and your banker had your priest or your rabbi or a pastor in jail, and your priest was spying against you, your banker was spying against you, and you were borrowing money from him. So overall, not very well. The good news is the faith community is growing dramatically in China, evidenced by many of these young lawyers, all highly educated, who have all become believers. You have a lot of change taking place. The demographics in China are not very positive toward the Chinese. They're becoming a very older nation. They have the one-child policy. You're finding many Chinese men who cannot find wives. So I think...
And that's because, I mean, there's abortion generally, but
abortion,
particularly girl babies.
Correct, if against young girls. And if there are many times abortions in order to get to the point that there is a boy born. So China has a lot of problems. But overall, I don't believe that China, in fact, in some respects, China is as much of a threat to us today as Al-Qaeda is to us today. Economically, they are a major threat. Cracking down on religious faith, they are a major threat. They are spying. Mike Rogers, the chairman of our intelligence committee, about 2 months ago said there are two kind of companies in America. Those who have been hit with a cyber attack and know it, and those who have been hit with a cyber attack and don't know it. The Chinese came in several years ago and stripped my computer, took everything off of my computer.
How did they do that?
Excuse me?
How did they do that?
It was a cyber attack. They have an elite corps in China, and they took everything off. They took my schedule, every human rights case I worked on. They hit Chris Smith, Congressman Chris Smith. They hit Senator Kirk, Mark Kirk, and they hit the the International Relations Committee. 17 members, including myself, and the International Relations Committee was stripped. They took everything off. They have a very aggressive cyber a program where they not only try to use it for military aspects, but they also use it for industrial secrets, to find ingredients, to spy. A large portion of their gains in the space program have come because of industrial espionage. So they're not a friend of ours. The Chinese people are wonderful people. And when you have an opportunity to spend time with them, there's this basic cavity that freedom fills, and they want it. And they are making economic progress. But I believe that in my lifetime, or certainly soon thereafter, we will see a dramatic change in China. We're even hearing stories in the last 2 or 3 months of military mobilizations and different things taking place in China. But as of now, today, the Chinese people are wonderful people, but the Chinese government is not our friend. Is not our friend.
No, what do you think, what effect will the growth of Christianity in China have on that and the government?
I think it will dramatically change. I think anytime a government tries to crack down on faith, it never works. In fact, as I heard a sermon, we were talking earlier by Tim Keller to that effect, that whenever there's a crackdown, faith kind of bubbles up. So my sense is the faith effort in China may very well be the saving grace, if you will, with regard to the United States and China. But I think it could potentially dramatically change China for the good. That's my hope. That's my expectation. And quite frankly, that's my prayer. I pray for that every single night. I was at an event that I cover in my book at a restaurant in Vienna, Virginia. The restaurant was called the Marco Polo. And it was 1990, I think it was, and it was a lady who got up, elderly woman who had an accent, Eastern European accent. I don't know what country she was from. And she asked me, why did I think the Soviet Union fell? And I gave her a classic Republican answer. I said, Ronald Reagan put the cruise missiles in, and Ronald Reagan did this, and Ronald Reagan did that. She said to me, well, no, I don't think that was the reason, she says. She says the reason was because millions of us have been praying for the fall of communism and the defeat of the Soviet Union. And all of a sudden it hit me as a small kid in a rote way. I, every night, would before I go to bed, say my prayers, would pray for the defeat of the Soviet Union. Almost in a way, not thinking of it, almost rote. You know how you just say something. And I believe the faith issue, both with regard to the president, but Pope John Paul and Lech Walesa and Peter Negrut in Romania, and many others, really changed the Soviet Union. So I think it will have a great impact, hopefully, in China.
Yeah, let me just say, I mean, I hope all the students here will be praying for Chinese Christians and the growth of Christianity in China regularly, both for God's glory and their salvation, but also in your own self-interest, because my sense is, and tell me whether you think this, Congressman, that in several decades, the United States and China will probably be at war unless the growth of Christianity in China continues, in which case then I suspect there'll be peace. It'll make that type of difference in the whole world.
Yeah, I think it could very well make that type of difference. And one of the things that when you meet with believers in China, both when they come into the United States, but when you meet with them there, they can't understand why the church in the West doesn't really advocate for them. They don't understand why our religious community, our faith community here in the United States, doesn't speak out more the way that was done during the 70s and 80s with regard to the Soviet Union. They just can't quite understand that, and they expect more of that. And I think you're exactly right. I think prayer and meeting with, and as they come over to visit, again, I don't know if there's anybody here who met with the lawyers who came to the prayer breakfast. I'm sure a couple of you, you met with them. They will tell you that very thing, just what you said, Mr. Olasky, that the faith community and the prayer is changing, and they want to see us embracing them more, if you will, because the Chinese people are wonderful people. But the faith community here in the West should advocate for, including adopting prisoners of conscience, when adopting the families of prisoners of conscience. Groups like Open Doors and Voice of the Martyrs during the 80s used to, when Sharansky or someone would be in, the Sharansky told me that the warden in Perm 35 couldn't understand all the mail that he was getting about Sharansky, and felt I ought to take care of this guy, make sure he has enough food, that he's not hurt, so I don't get in trouble. I mean, just writing letters to the dissidents, meeting with their families, doing things like that, praying for them, can make a tremendous difference in moving the nation whereby we are not at war or an altercation with them.
Why do you think there is that difference between the attitudes of Christians and others and the commitment in regard to the Soviet Union and praying for those people and working for the release of prisoners? Why there was a whole lot of that then? There isn't very much now in part of the church. Why?
I don't know that I have the answer. I completely. I think so many businesses are doing business with China. There were no American businesses doing business with Russia. I remember there was one company that was going to do something with regard to buses, and President Reagan spoke out. No law firm in Washington in the 80s would have ever represented the Soviet Union. Today, Communist China has a large number of some of the best law firms in Washington, some of the very best, representing them. So economically, I think we have become so entangled with China that maybe that's had a little bit of a difference. Lastly, you do not have the leadership, neither of the Republican Party or of the Democratic Party, and certainly not in this White House, speaking out on these issues the way that Reagan did and the way that people like Scoop Jackson and others did during that period of time. Yeah, the Vice President of China was in America about 2 months ago, and this administration's religious freedom ambassador, Susan Johnson Cook, couldn't get a visa to go to China. So here you had the Obama administration ambassador for human rights and religious freedom can't get a visa to go to China at the very time the Vice President of China was coming here and meeting with the president.
How did you get into Tibet, and what did you see there?
I snuck into Tibet.
So how did you do that?
I flew to Kathmandu. I had my office work with a group. We applied for a visa out of Chicago. I got a clean passport, told the truth, put my occupation as a lawyer, and we went in with a trekking group. It's great trekking. It's a beautiful country. And so we flew to Kathmandu, and then in Kathmandu hooked up with the trekking group, and we went in. And then the first day we sort of broke away from the trekking group. I said I wasn't feeling well. I really wasn't. I had altitude sickness. And then I was with a young Buddhist monk from the United States who was born in the United States, was the son of a flower child couple here in America, born in Nepal, put in a Buddhist monastery at age 2 or 3, who spoke the language. He was with us, and we would go back into the monasteries. He would begin to speak, and they were shocked. Here's a Westerner, a Western-looking person speaking. And so we had all the information given to us, and we didn't tell anybody what we did, but we did it through a trekking group that we went in with.
And then you were able to get out without
Then
any...
we got out, and then we came back and held a press conference. And then later the fellow, Dasha, who was in with us, went back in again and was arrested and had a very difficult time, and was either thrown out of a building or jumped out of a building. It's unclear. And then Dasha died this past year. But that's how we were able to get in, working with this group who got us connected to a trekking group, and then we went in with the trekkers.
So I've noticed that you've been a proponent of religious liberty not only for Christians, but, for example, in Tibet for Buddhists. Richard Gere and some other actors have been very much speaking out in favor of liberty for Buddhists in Tibet. I haven't seen them doing the same thing in regard to, say Christians in China or in other places. Am I missing that?
No, I don't think you are missing it. I'm the co-chairman of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, and we speak out for every group who's being persecuted because of their faith.
And Tom Lantos is a Democrat, right?
Right, Tom Lantos has since died. Yes, he was a Democrat. During the 80s, there was a good bipartisan effort. Henry Hyde and Tom Lantos would work together on human rights. It's pretty much gone, to be honest with you now. But you don't really hear it. But I don't really hear that many Christian movie stars advocating for Christians. So I wouldn't be critical of Richard Gere for advocating for the Buddhists. It'd be great to advocate for. I had the Catholic Bishop of Hong Kong in to see me now almost 6 months ago, and he just didn't think anyone was advocating for him and for the Catholic Church. And so I would hope that the Richard Geres and the movie stars, whatever their faith, would advocate for those who are being persecuted around the world. Christians are being persecuted in Egypt. The Coptic Christians being persecuted. Your magazine has covered it in Iraq. The Assyrian, Chaldean Christians are going through a very difficult time, and clearly in Vietnam and in China, but almost there aren't really a lot of Christian leaders advocating for Christians who are persecuted in those countries.
Yeah. Let me ask about the Middle East then. Is religious liberty, is there more religious liberty under dictatorship than under democratic Muslim rule?
No, there will be. I was in Egypt last year in June. I nominated a Coptic Christian, Mama Maggie, for the Nobel Prize. The Coptic Christians are living in fear, and what you're seeing in Egypt now, I think you're going to see less and less and less. They didn't do very well under Mubarak, but I think they're going to do less well under this current group. You have the Muslim Brotherhood, a majority of the parliament, then you have the Salafists, who have probably 15 to 20 or 30%. So I think you may very well, I'm not predicting that, but you could see Sharia law being carried out in Egypt, because probably a majority of the parliament in Egypt currently favors Sharia law. In Iraq, the Christian community is down to probably maybe 300,000. Very difficult time for the Christians in Iraq. So no, I don't think that you're going to see more freedom. In some respects, you may very well see less.
Well, so let me ask a question not just about the Obama administration, but about the Bush administration as well. Did we make a mistake in making elections our key goal rather than making religious liberty our primary goal?
Well, we may have. I spoke to one of your students earlier who's not here, who had been a young Marine who had served in Afghanistan. He said it's very difficult to transplant American democracy to Afghanistan. I led the first delegation to Afghanistan when the war broke out with Congressman Joe Pitts and Congressman Tony Hall. You can't just replicate American democracy in Afghanistan. It's just not going to work. And so I hadn't heard the question asked quite the way that you did, but looking at it, and I never thought of it, to be honest, in that way, but looking at it, maybe the answer is yes. An election whereby there's free and fair election, as you may well have in Egypt, that brings you the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists, that implement Sharia law and brings about a situation whereby not only the Coptic Christians are 500,000 of them, but the Baha'is are having you can't even get a driver's license if you're Baha'i. May very well lead to a circumstance that is actually worse, gotten there through, quote, true democracy, one man, one vote, but once they get in, almost to a degree the way the communists took over in certain other countries in the 30s, could mean it could actually be worse. So maybe your point is well taken. Maybe we should have been advocating for freedom and human rights and religious freedom more than just kind of a free and fair vote. Because once they take over, we had a young blogger in my office 3 weeks ago who was in prison, who when I was there I tried to visit. He is since out. He wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal about 3 weeks ago. I mean, life for them, for a Coptic Christian, may very well be worse now than it was under Mubarak. And we've given Egypt over $50 billion.
Yeah. So in a moment, I'll be asking all of you just to come up with questions. And again, as you can see, they can be questions about just about anywhere in the world. So quite a large range here. But let me just ask you one domestic political question first, political and economic question. You recently were very critical of Grover Norquist and the no tax pledge that all Republican candidates are just about obliged to sign these days. Could you tell us a little bit about your critique and why you think he's not right?
Well, I took an hour out on the floor and I lay it out, which people are welcome to read. They can call my office, we can give them a copy, or they can look it up online. One, I never signed the pledge. The pledge I take is to my constituents. I believe I serve them. They're my boss. If you live in my district, I work for you. Secondly, I think the pledge is you take an oath to the Constitution. To say that you would never do anything, and the interpretation of the no tax pledge is so strange that it's almost obscene. Mm-hmm. In 2010, GE paid no taxes, no corporate taxes. Everyone out here who's paying their taxes pay more taxes than GE paid. Well, that's a tax earmark. That's a loophole that ought to be closed. The no tax pledge says if you raise taxes on GE, you're raising taxes. Well, you all pay taxes. They should pay taxes. And so the interpreter of the pledge is Grover Norquist. Now, who gave Grover Norquist, never elected, to be the interpreter of a pledge? And so to sign something, he's a lobbyist in Washington. He says he puts the pledge in his safe. To sign a pledge to a lobbyist that he puts in his safe, and he represents a number of groups that he manipulates this pledge for, I think is absolutely wrong. And so I think it's a mistake for any member of Congress to sign a pledge on anything like this, particularly to a lobbyist. So, but I mean, there's much more than I could say, but you don't have enough time. I mean.
Okay, we have time for questions. This is not where in the world is Carmen Sandiego. It's where in the world are there abuses? Go ahead.
Thank you, Congressman Wolf. I just have a quick question. I'm sure you've heard about the Coney 2012 campaign by Invisible Children. I'm just curious about your thoughts on the type of awareness, which is, they're saying it's meant to make Coney famous, essentially to make Joseph Coney, the leader of the LRA, famous around the world so that the people of different countries pressure their governments to support the U.S. troops there that are training the Ugandan troops, as well as encourage the UN's ICC to indict him and to put him before court. What are your thoughts on this type of awareness campaign? I know this weekend thousands of people are going to put posters up all around the United States, around the Western world, for this awareness campaign. And secondly, what type of enforcement mechanism actually exists when the ICC can indict leaders like Joseph Kony or Bashir in Sudan, but doesn't really have the enforcement power to actually capture them and try them? So what are your thoughts on that as far as nonprofits awareness efforts go, and then how does that pressure actually play out with the government's actions?
Well, that's a good question. I have so many thoughts that we could take the whole afternoon and go into the evening. I supported President Obama sending American soldiers there. They're not for combat. I was one of the few. But I also supported President Clinton on sending the soldiers to Kosovo to do what he did in Kosovo. Again, controversial. But we had genocide. Also, Bashir, I've been to Sudan 5 times. Bashir is an indicted war criminal. He's indicted for ethnic cleansing, for genocide, for the atrocities that I have seen and have talked to young women who have told me about them, but I've seen with my own eyes. So I thought the indictment, and Coney is the first person indicted by the World Court, and we are urging the administration to cut off any foreign aid to any country that allows Bashir to visit. Now, Coney isn't visiting other nations, but I think what those 2 people did with regard to the educational video was, I watched it. I think it's very important. I've been up in that region. I've had staff go up to that region to interview several years ago some of the young children. The young children at nighttime come into these villages in order to keep away so they're not kidnapped. And I think Coney, rightfully so, was indicted, is a war criminal, has done terrible, terrible things. And anytime, I'm encouraged when people care about what's taking place. I'm more concerned about, they had the question, why aren't people doing the same thing about the Catholic bishops in China? Or why aren't they doing the same thing? Why isn't somebody out there doing what these 2 people did on the Coney video? Why aren't they doing it for the video for the Christians in Iraq? Or why aren't they doing it for the video for the Christians in Egypt? Or why isn't someone doing video about the Christians in China? And so I say my hat's off to them. I think it's appropriate, and more people focus. And the young people that put this video on, one of them was by my office a number of years ago. They've gotten more attention than the Secretary of State has gotten for that issue. So I say, well done, and hopefully they'll track Coney down and bring him to the court. Now, to take you to the next step, Milosevic was an indicted war criminal. Mladic was an indicted war criminal. Karadzic was an indicted war criminal. The world focused on them, and they were taken to The Hague. The world hasn't focused on Bashir, who has been involved for killing many more people, because on the continent of Africa, if everything Bashir did he had done in southern France or southern Germany, the world would be up in arms. Yeah, nobody cares. Or if some of these other things were done. So many people in Africa wonder, everyone wanted to get Milosevic, they wanted to get Karadzic, they wanted to get Mladic, and they got him. Bashir's been indicted longer, Coney's been indicted longer, and nobody even cared. So the fact that they're bringing the attention to it, I think is a very positive thing.
See, there was another hand up right over here. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you again for coming, sir. I think a lot of students on campus have been very concerned with the situation in North Korea, and we've been talking about that a lot, and the Christians and others in concentration camps. what are some ways that we as individuals and then the U.S. government as well can help in that situation?
Well, that's really a good question, and one I care deeply about. I just finished reading the book. I read it last week, by Blaine Harden. Have anyone read the book? It's about the only person who's ever been born in a camp and escaped. And it's an incredible book. Blaine Harden was with me when I was in Sudan, the first trip in Ethiopia in 1984. I couldn't get up to the refugee camp. Finally, long story, hitched a ride on a World Vision plane. But Blaine Harden was covering it for the Post, did a story making me look kind of silly. He said I was eating pizza in a hotel, and I was. And they have good pizza because the Italians used to run Ethiopia. But he's a great reporter, and we've since become good friends. He wrote an incredible book, and if you want to call my office, we can get you the name of it. No one's saying anything about it, so the fact that the students here are interested is amazing. Those slave labor camps are almost like Dachau. They're terrible places. There are probably 200,000 more people. I had 3 women come by to see me about 6 months ago who had been in the camps, had been released. One was released, I think, to celebrate the ultimate leader's birthday, and another was released for another thing. Life there is terrible. They both left, went into China. They were sexually trafficked into China. The world should be outraged. But even during the Bush administration and this administration, the special envoy for North Korea never talks about these issues. In fact, is when you hear all the talk about North Korea the last week has been what? The missile, which didn't go very well. I saw no one really mention the slave labor camps. And there are hundreds of thousands, there are 200,000 or 300,000 people in those camps, and you almost never get out of the camps. And if you read this book, and I urge you to read it, it's very short, it's brutal what they go through. And yet the world has just sort of focused on it. And, you know, I've had mixed feelings about, do you feed the North Koreans or not? And after you finish this book, you may think the best thing we could do as a country is bring that government down. Do the same thing that President Reagan did with regard to the Soviet Union. Put all the pressure, because I think economically they're dependent upon China, they're dependent upon others, and we should be working to bring the government of North Korea down so freedom and democracy can come about. And sometimes that may take a little more difficult to get there, but you're the first person that's raised it with me. There's a group in town, a woman named Susan Schulte, who works with a group that advocates for it, but almost no one has expressed any interest. And when you read the book, what's taking place in North Korea and in these camps is so brutal that the mind can barely comprehend. And yet the world says nothing. The Obama administration says nothing. And in fairness, the Bush administration really didn't say anything. All the talk, who was our ambassador, Chris Hill, all the talk was with regard to nuclear weapons, which are important, but also, you know, man does not live by bread alone. There should have been great pressure. And had that pressure been applied early, I believe the North Korean government would have already collapsed as of this moment.
So when we send food there, does it actually go to the people in desperate need, or does it go to feed the military?
It's almost, the book will give you the impression, I've talked to, there's some really good people that send food there, who I mean, Franklin Graham, Samaritan's Purse, does a great job. I was in Sudan a month in southern Sudan in the camp. It was the same camp that George Clooney was in. I was there before Clooney. Samaritan's Purse runs that camp, and if it hadn't been for Samaritan's Purse there, these people would be dying. But Samaritan's Purse gives food to North Korea, and they do it for the right reason. But the book will give you the impression that maybe no more than 60% of the food gets to the people that really need it, and so maybe that's okay. A lot of the food will go to the military. A lot of the food will go to government officials. So it's a tough moral issue that I don't think I have the answer to. And if you ask me, should we give it, should we not give it, I can argue both sides.
Yeah.
And I would never be critical of anyone who is giving it.
Yeah. By the way, one more reading recommendation in regard to North Korea. There's a wonderful novel that came out a few months ago by Adam Johnson called The Orphan Master's Son, set in North Korea. And it's very interesting, both for North Korea, but just it's also literarily brilliant. So I heavily recommend that, The Orphan Master's Son. It's a question. There.
Yes, thank you very much for coming out to talk to us today. In 2008, when the Olympics were held in China, there was a whole lot of attention shed on the human rights issue. Do you think that the situation in China has changed substantially at all since before the Olympics and afterwards? And what specific steps would you like to see in the incoming administration to remedy the persecution of Christians and put some pressure on the Chinese government?
Well, I think the conditions, I know the conditions are actually worse. I admired President Bush, supported him, and I think he truly cared about human rights and religious freedom. But in the last 2 years of the Bush administration, I think they could have done more in China than they actually did. I was there a couple weeks before the Olympics, the meeting that I was meeting with religious leaders on, that everyone was arrested but one, and the one was arrested was beaten the next day. Condoleezza Rice was in town the very time, and I went to the embassy to meet with Clark Grant, our ambassador, who had been there for 8 years, who I think now represents Chinese companies, which I think is inappropriate. I told him about it, and frankly, they didn't really do anything. And the next day, there was a press conference with the Secretary of State and I think the Chinese Foreign Minister. And the conversation, the banter was, what venue were they going to go see in the Olympics? So I, along with Congressman Chris Smith and others, urged President Bush not to go to the Olympics. I think it would have been better for him not to have gone. And the person who designed the stadium, Huawei, has since been arrested. But things are worse. The Nobel Prize winner, Xiaobo, wasn't. He had a situation. 2009 Nobel Prize winner, President Obama, had a state dinner on for Hu Jintao at the very time the 2010 Nobel Prize winner, Xiaobo, was in prison and his wife was under house arrest and couldn't go to Oslo to pick up the prize. Conditions are much worse. They've gotten much worse. Actually, they've gotten much worse since the year 2000. I think Bush cared deeply about it. I think the last 2 years of the Bush administration, they could have done a lot more. This administration is very, very weak. I mean, here you have President Obama's meeting with the Vice President of China, and President Obama's Human Rights and Religious Freedom Ambassador, Susan Johnson Cook, can't get a visa to go to China. And she was going to go and visit a couple of house churches. I've written everybody in the Bush administration and everybody in the Clinton administration, in the Obama administration that goes to China, asking them, would they go and visit a house church? I got in trouble. I asked Ambassador Locke, would he go worship? And he kind of put me down. He didn't, that I had no right to tell him what his religion is. And I corrected myself, not worship, go visit. Sharansky said, just showing up, just being there. I mean, I'm not Buddhist, but I went into a Buddhist monastery to be with the people that were being persecuted. But everyone I wrote to in the Bush administration, Commerce, State, and White House, to go, and Bob Fu, who you may or may not know, said he would arrange and find a house church pastor that wanted them to come, because you sometimes give them protection. And no one in the Bush administration would visit a house church. And when the president went to China, he visited the official church, which is fine. I'm not critical. But no one in this administration has been willing to visit. I asked the trade rep, Kirk, to visit. I asked Locke to visit. And none of them have been willing to visit a house church where the house church leader welcomed them to come. And so I think conditions are absolutely, positively, categorically much worse, and they got much worse in the last 3 years, but they haven't gotten any better since really 2000.
Thank you for coming today. A lot of our students here are very politically active, like our college Republicans helps your elections and stuff like that. But I think we can all kind of see that there's a problem with the polarization of partisanship in the country right now. We're talking a little bit about like groups like Grover runs and stuff like that. And I know like the left has their unions and things like that too. But what can we do as students, and what are you doing or others trying to do now to kind of break that partisanship? You talked about like things that you used to do with Tony Hall and stuff like that. How can we change the culture of Washington to be more in line with focusing on issues, whether it's the entitlements or these human rights campaigns?
Well, that's a good issue. It's a good question. I think there's less bipartisanship today than there's ever been. I think you're going to have compromise. I think you compromise up, you don't compromise down. The founding fathers compromised. The greatest president we've ever had, or who I believe we've ever had, is President George Washington. He was the president of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in that hot summer of 1787. They compromised. The big states compromised with the small states, and people compromised, didn't get everything they wanted. I mean, many would have liked to abolish slavery. They didn't do it, but they compromised. And I just think we have to reach across and those who are from the faith community, love God, greatest commandment, love God, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. And who is your neighbor? I mean, maybe the person you don't completely agree with on every issue. But I think the country's in trouble. I think there are many people that believe that this nation is facing a crisis. I believe we are. We have $15.5 trillion in debt. By the end of the year, when you decorate your Christmas tree, I was here for the Christmas concert. You had beautiful Christmas trees. As Christmas trees will be decorated at the end of the year, the debt will be at $17 trillion. A large portion of it borrowed from the Chinese, which are persecuting the church, and a large portion borrowed from the Saudis. The Saudis who funded the radical madrasas up on the Afghan-Pakistan border that led to 9/11, that you certainly can't go to downtown Riyadh and go to a Baptist church or a Catholic church or a Jewish synagogue and worship. They're our bankers. And the debt and the deficit is consuming us. It is consuming us. A great nation cannot continue to go at these numbers. Right now, we roughly $4 billion a week goes out to interest, interest. I think by 2021, it'll be $2.7 billion a day. Billion a day. And so I think we need to. I supported a vote just before the recess. We had a vote on the Simpson-Bowles Commission. I support the Simpson-Bowles Commission. Did I think everything in there is great? No. But you change what you can change, but we have to get control of this debt and the deficit. And I think there's, it just becomes almost, the question, if we do not, this nation will be in serious trouble. Many people are discussing and doing articles saying America is in decline or America is facing decline. Now, whether you are in decline or facing decline is a condition. A house is declining because that's the condition. The house declined because the owner of the house had a choice. The owner could have fixed the house up, fixed the roof, fixed the floor, and so decline is a choice. And right now, the choice the nation is making is to allow us to go into decline by not dealing with the debt and the deficit. So I think you have to reach out more bipartisanship, and those who are from the faith community perhaps have the great commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. Reach and make every effort. And as I was saying earlier, before this, President Reagan and Speaker Tip O'Neill, I don't know that they were friends. I don't know. But they met with each other. And when Reagan was shot, Tip O'Neill went to the hospital, and the story is he prayed with the president. And so We just have to reach out, and for the good of the nation, whether you're Republican or Democrat, we got to solve this debt and this deficit and deal with it soon so we can have a renaissance in this nation and not see us go in to a decline. But right now, I think the nation is more polarized, and certainly the Congress is more polarized than it's ever been since I've served there.
Thank you for coming today. I am Director of Human Resources here at the college, not a student, and my question relates to health care. Not too long ago, the Department of Health and Human Services issued some regulations that affect us relating to coverages we're required to provide, which are against our religious beliefs. And right now we have what's called this 1-year safe harbor, and I'm just wondering how you think that's going to be resolved. We're in the same situation as many other Catholic hospitals and charities.
I hope it's resolved in a positive way. I don't want this to get political, but I think if there's a new administration, it will be resolved. I think it should be resolved. It's clearly an issue of conscience. It's an issue of belief. And for a Catholic hospital or a Protestant college or a Jewish institution or whatever to be forced to do something on an issue of the basic tenets and beliefs of that religion and of that hospital or of that church is inappropriate. I believe there are the votes in the House to reverse that. I would have hoped the House would have brought it up before the Senate. The Senate, there was a vote in the Senate. It didn't go very well. It was relatively close. I don't know what the makeup of it was or how it was later performed. My sense is we in the House will repeal that based on a religious issue. And there was a great op-ed piece that was done by Chuck Colson, who I think is one of the... Chuck Colson, as I was saying earlier, combines hard-headed realism, having been in the Nixon administration, with tremendous faith. But Chuck Colson, Cardinal Wuerl, the cardinal here in Washington, D.C., and a Jewish rabbi from New York City, did a very good piece in the Wall Street Journal, which I sent to every member of the House. But my hope and expectation is that the Congress would reverse it, even if the administration does not reverse it. And lastly, the healthcare law may very well be held unconstitutional. The Supreme Court will be ruling in June, and while you can't depend on how the oral arguments went, the indications are that there's a reasonable chance the law will be held unconstitutional.
Well, we're going to have to stop here, but I want to thank Congressman Wolf for standing up for the religiously oppressed, standing up for people under great duress all over the world, and doing it for a long time. So please join me in thanking Congressman Wolf for that and for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. It is a privilege to have you here at Patrick Henry College. Let me remind our audience, both in person and via their webcast, that we will have 2 more fascinating interviews this week. Tomorrow at noon, we'll have Maggie Gallagher here, who is one of the founders of the National Organization for Marriage. And the next day, noon on Thursday, we'll have Jim Liskey, who is the CEO.
Wednesday, noon on Wednesday.
That's Wednesday, I'm sorry. Tuesday, and then Wednesday, right, is Jim Liskey, CEO of Prison Fellowship, Chuck Colson's organization. And again, we thank everyone for being here, the many people watching via webcast, and we'll be joined, of course, by about 400,000 readers of World Magazine when they read this fascinating interview when it's published by Marvin, Olasky, and World. And again, thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Wolf.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Thank you.